"Let the Moonstone judge her blood," Elder Aldrich said, and every wolf in the hall turned to watch Elara Whitmore break. She stood barefoot on the white marble steps of Moonstone Hall, the hem of her plain gray dress brushing her ankles, her pale fingers curled tightly at her sides. Above her, the sacred stone hovered in its silver cradle, larger than a man's shield, glowing with the cold light of a winter moon. Around her gathered the noble packs of the Northern Territories, hundreds of wolves dressed in velvet, silk, and polished silver, their faces beautiful and merciless beneath the hanging banners of Silverpine Citadel. No one spoke kindly. No one stepped forward. They had all come to witness a royal ceremony, but Elder Aldrich had turned it into a trial. "This girl carries a stain," he announced, his voice echoing from the frost-carved pillars to the vaulted ceiling. "Her mother's line was never proven. Her wolf is weak. Her scent is nearly silent. And tonight, before our king, we will see whether the moon itself rejects her." A murmur moved through the hall like wind over snow. Elara felt every whisper as if it touched her skin. Impure, unworthy, mistake. She kept her eyes lowered, not because she believed them, but because lifting her head had always cost her more than she could afford. All her life, Silverpine had taught her to stay near the edges of rooms, near the kitchen doors, near the stable fires, near the places where unwanted girls could be useful without being seen. She knew how to clean a wound without flinching. She knew how to calm a frightened horse with one hand against its neck. She knew which herbs soothed fever, which roots eased pain, which silence kept a cruel word from becoming something worse. But none of that mattered here. In the North, blood mattered. Names mattered. Power mattered. Gentleness was treated like a flaw unless it belonged to someone already strong. At the far end of the hall, King Kalen Frostborn sat upon the obsidian throne, still as a statue carved from midnight and snow. He was taller than any man in the room, broad-shouldered beneath a black cloak lined in silver fur, his pale face unreadable, his winter-gray eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. The stories said the Alpha King of the North never wasted mercy. They said his wolf could silence a room before his voice ever did. They said no woman had ever stirred the Moonstone for him, not a princess, not a warrior's daughter, not the finest bred Omega in 7 territories. Elara had believed those stories were far away from her life, the kind servants whispered over dying fires. Yet now he was here, watching as Elder Aldrich reached for her wrist with a smile that carried no warmth. "Come forward, child," Aldrich said softly, though the softness made it worse. "Prove us wrong, if you can." A few young nobles laughed behind their hands. Someone near the front whispered that the stone might go dark from her touch. Elara's breath caught, but she did not pull away. She looked once toward the crowd, searching without meaning to, and found only faces turned sharp by expectation. Then, from somewhere near the rear doors, she saw her grandmother Miriam standing alone in a faded blue shawl, her back bent but her eyes fierce. Miriam gave the smallest nod, and Elara remembered the words she had been told as a child when the other pups refused to run with her. "The moon does not make mistakes." Elara stepped up to the Moonstone. The air around it was so cold it stung her cheeks, and when she lifted her hand, her fingers trembled badly enough for the first row to notice. Another ripple of laughter passed through the nobles. Elder Aldrich leaned close enough for only her to hear. "When nothing happens, bow your head and leave quietly. That will be the last kindness this court gives you." Elara swallowed the ache in her throat. For one heartbeat, she wanted to obey. She wanted to disappear back into the stable shadows, back to the small cot under the rafters, back to a world where humiliation came in smaller rooms. But the Moonstone pulsed once, faintly, like something sleeping had heard her name. King Kalen's head lifted. The hall seemed to draw a single breath. Elara placed her palm against the sacred stone. Nothing happened. Silence spread, heavy and cruel. Aldrich's smile widened. Then a thin silver crack appeared beneath her hand. The crack was so small at first that Elara thought she had imagined it. A hairline of silver light trembled beneath her palm, no wider than a thread, yet it sent a chill through the entire hall. The laughter faded one breath at a time. Elder Aldrich's smile stiffened, and his hand shot forward, not touching her, but hovering close as if he could command the sacred stone to remember the story he had built around her. "A surface flaw," he said quickly, his voice louder than it needed to be. Old stone shifts under pressure. Remove your hand. Alara did not move. She could not. The cold that had bitten her skin was changing, turning warm beneath her palm, then warmer still, like sunlight trapped under ice. It traveled through her wrist, up her arm, and settled behind her ribs, not painful, not frightening, but familiar in a way that made tears press behind her eyes. For years, she had felt other people's pain as if it were weather passing through her body. A scraped knee from a stable boy, a fever in a child's forehead, the loneliness of an old mare left outside during a storm. She had learned to hide that gift because Silverpine did not praise gentle magic. They wanted power that roared, power that conquered, power that bent others low. Alara's power had only ever asked how it could help, and so they called it weakness. They called her weakness. The memory came sharp and sudden, as if the Moonstone had opened a door inside her. She was 9 years old again, kneeling beside a white foal that would not stand, her small hands glowing faintly under the straw. Her mother, Leora, had been alive then, pale and tired but still beautiful, her silver blonde hair braided over one shoulder. "Do not be ashamed of a quiet gift," Leora had whispered. "The moon is quiet too, and still it pulls the sea." The next winter, her mother was gone, and the whispers began before the funeral candles cooled. Unknown blood. Unverified line. Too strange to trust. By the time Alara turned 12, mothers pulled their children away from her in the market. By 16, the healers used her hands in secret and denied her name in public. By 19, she had learned that being useful did not mean being accepted. A deeper crack spread across the Moonstone. This one sang. It was not a sound heard by ears, but every wolf in the hall felt it in their bones. Several nobles stepped back. The silver cradle above the altar shivered. Elder Aldrich's face lost color. "Enough," he snapped, turning toward the throne. "Your Majesty, this is unsafe. The girl is disturbing the rite." At the far end of the hall, King Kalen rose. He did not hurry. He did not speak. The simple act of standing drew every eye away from Alara and pulled silence tight across the room. His black cloak fell around him like a winter night, and the silver clasp at his shoulder caught the Moonstone's light. For the first time, Alara looked directly at him. The distance between them was nearly 60 feet, filled with nobles, elders, guards, and years of rules meant to keep girls like her invisible. Yet his gaze found hers as if nothing stood between them at all. His eyes were not cold now. They were alert, almost startled, and beneath that, something older than surprise. Recognition. Alara's breath caught. Her wolf, the faint quiet presence she had believed too weak to answer, stirred inside her chest and lifted its head. Aldrich noticed. His mouth tightened. "Remove her," he ordered the nearest attendants, but none stepped forward. Not while the king was standing. Not while the Moonstone was singing. Alara felt the warmth in her hand pulse again, stronger this time, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. The sacred stone beneath her palm was no longer judging her. It was answering her. Another silver crack raced outward, then another, spreading like moonlight across frozen glass. Someone gasped. Miriam's voice rose from the back of the hall, trembling but clear. "Let it finish." Aldrich spun toward her, fury breaking through his polished mask. "Silence, old woman." But the hall had already changed. The people who had laughed at Alara now watched her as if she had become a door they were afraid to see open. King Kalen took his first step down from the throne. The Moonstone flared beneath Alara's hand, and every torch in the hall dimmed. The torches dimmed until their flames looked like tiny stars trapped in glass. Alara felt the hall fall away from her, not vanishing, but softening at the edges, as if the Moonstone had pulled a veil of silver light between her and the world. Beneath her palm, the sacred stone trembled with a steady, living rhythm. It did not feel like stone anymore. It felt like a memory trying to become a voice. King Kalen moved down the steps from the throne, and each measured footfall carried through the silence. No guard announced him. No elder dared block him. The nobles parted before him in a widening path, their silk sleeves brushing, their polished shoes whispering over marble. Alara watched him come closer, and the strange warmth in her chest grew brighter, answering something in him that she did not understand. He was frightening in the way mountains were frightening, not because they meant harm, but because they could not be moved. Elder Aldrich stepped sideways, placing himself between the king and the altar with a bow that looked respectful but felt desperate. "Your Majesty, I must insist that the rite be paused. The girl may carry unstable magic. Her mother was never cleared by the council, and her presence here was already an act of mercy." The word mercy touched Alara like a slap she had heard too many times. Mercy was what they called the corner bed they let her keep in the storage loft. Mercy was the leftover bread placed near the back door. Mercy was being allowed to serve the same families who refused to say her name when guests were listening. She had built a life out of the scraps they named kindness, and somehow they still expected gratitude. Kalen stopped beside Aldrich, taller by nearly a head, his pale face unreadable. "Move," he said. "One word." Low, calm, absolute. Aldrich's throat shifted. "Sire, the council is responsible for the purity of royal rites." Kalen's gaze did not leave Alara. "The moon is responsible for the moon." A shiver passed through the hall. Alara heard someone breathe out sharply behind her. The moonstone pulsed again, and another silver crack opened beneath her fingers, curving into a shape almost like a crescent. Suddenly, her grandmother Miriam pushed through the line of nobles near the back, her faded blue shawl slipping from one shoulder. Two attendants reached as if to stop her, but she lifted her chin with such quiet command that they hesitated. "Tell him, Aldrich," Miriam called. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with age and fury held back for too long. "Tell the king why you sealed Leora Whitmore's records." Alara turned her head. For a moment, even the light seemed to stop moving. Her mother's name had always been spoken in whispers, never in full, never with honor. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. "This is neither the place nor the time for old grief. It became the place when you put her daughter on trial," Miriam answered. The nobles began murmuring again, but softer now, uncertain. Alara felt the moonstone warming through her hand, as if urging her to listen. Kalen looked at Miriam for the first time. "Speak." That single command opened something no one in Silverpine had been willing to touch. Miriam stepped forward, leaning on nothing but her own will. Leora was not impure. She was hidden. Her bloodline was older than this council, older than Silverpine's claim to these halls. She came from the Lunar White Wolves, the line that guarded the first moonstone before the northern throne was ever carved. A sound moved through the crowd, half disbelief, half fear. Alara could not breathe. She stared at her grandmother, searching for any sign that this was a dream born from humiliation and light. Lunar White Wolves were not people from village gossip. They were legends painted on chapel ceilings, silver wolves running beside the moon, keepers of vows no king could break. Aldrich laughed once, thin and sharp. A convenient fairy tale. Miriam's eyes flashed. "Then why did you burn the witness pages? Why did you mark her child as tainted before she could even speak?" Alara's hand trembled against the moonstone. The crack beneath her palm widened. Inside it, a silver glow gathered like dawn under ice. Kalen finally looked at Aldrich, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Answer her." Aldrich opened his mouth, but no sound came. And in that silence, the moonstone answered for him. The moonstone's glow deepened until every carved symbol in the hall awakened with pale fire. Ancient runes along the pillars, long mistaken for decoration, brightened one by one, climbing toward the vaulted ceiling like silver vines. Alara heard the crowd draw back, but she could not turn away from the stone. Something was unfolding inside it, not a vision exactly, but a truth pressing itself into light. The crack beneath her palm widened into the shape of a crescent, and within that crescent appeared a mark she had seen only once before, stitched in blue thread on the inside of her grandmother's shawl. A white wolf beneath 3 moons. Miriam covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Elder Aldrich stepped backward, his confidence draining into panic. "This is enchantment," he said, though his voice no longer carried. "Someone has tampered with the altar." King Kalen did not look at him. He was staring at the mark as if it had reached into the guarded places of his own past. For the first time since he entered Moonstone Hall, the cold mask of the Northern King fractured. Not fully, not enough for the court to understand. But Alara saw it, because she was standing close enough now to feel the change in the air around him. Sorrow, recognition, a promise remembered too late. The moonstone released a low note, gentle and vast, and the silver light poured down around Alara's hand. It did not burn. It did not punish. It wrapped her in warmth. lifting strands of her pale hair from her shoulders and turning the plain gray fabric of her dress almost white. The nobles who had laughed at her fell silent. Some lowered their eyes. Others looked toward Aldrich, as if waiting for him to explain why the girl they had been taught to despise now stood at the center of a miracle. Alara wanted answers, but all she could feel was the ache of years shifting under her skin. Every cold glance, every door closed before she reached it. Every time someone accepted her healing and then wiped her name from the story. The light did not erase those wounds. It simply told her they had never been proof that she was less. Kalen stepped closer to the altar. "When I was a boy," he said, his voice quiet enough to make the room lean in, "my mother told me the Moonstone would never choose by rank. It would choose by truth." Aldrich shook his head. "Your Majesty, with respect, old legends do not overrule council law." Kalen turned then, slowly, and the elder stopped speaking. "Council law was written to serve the realm," Kalen said, "not to bury its heirs." The word heirs moved through the hall like a spark through dry grass. Alara's breath caught so sharply that her hand slipped against the stone. The Moonstone answered by brightening again, and this time the light spread beyond her palm, tracing the veins at her wrist in silver. She stared at the glow in disbelief. It was beautiful, but it frightened her too, because beauty had never protected her before. Aldrich seemed to sense that fear and reached for it like a weapon. "Look at her," he called to the crowd. "She does not even understand what she is. Would you let an untrained Omega carry a royal claim because a cracked stone flickers in her favor?" For a heartbeat, doubt returned to the room. Alara felt it settle on her shoulders, familiar and heavy. Then Miriam spoke again, softer this time. "She understands mercy. That is more than this council has shown in 20 years. Alara looked at her grandmother, and the knot in her chest loosened. She thought of the foal in the straw, the fevered children, the injured hand she had held in secret. She thought of all the quiet ways she had survived without becoming cruel. Slowly, she lifted her chin. "I never asked for a claim," she said, her voice unsteady but clear. "I only asked not to be called a stain for a truth no one would tell me." The Moonstone rang once, bright and pure. Kalen's gaze softened, and something in Alara's wolf answered with a trembling warmth. Aldrich opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, the silver cradle above the altar split open with a sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake. The Moonstone lifted free, hovering inches above Alara's hand. Then, before the entire court, it turned away from the elders and bowed its light toward her. The light bowed to Alara, and Moonstone Hall forgot how to breathe. For one impossible second, no one moved. The sacred stone hovered above her open palm, cracked through with silver fire, its glow bending toward her like a living thing recognizing home. Alara stared at it, afraid that if she blinked, the miracle would vanish and she would be back in the storage loft above the stables, waking from a cruel dream with dust in her hair and another day of silence waiting below. But the warmth stayed. It moved through her fingers, up her arms, and settled around her heart with a gentleness that felt almost like her mother's hand. Elder Aldrich looked at the nobles, then at the council, searching for someone brave enough to agree with him. No one did. The same people who had laughed at Alara now watched the stone with pale faces and lowered voices. Lady Maribel of Frostmere, who had once pulled her daughter away from Alara in the market, pressed a hand to her pearls. Lord Vance, who had refused to let Alara enter his house after she eased his son's fever, stared at the floor. Their shame did not come as an apology. It came as silence, and somehow that silence hurt more. King Kalen stepped beside Alara, close enough that she felt the winter scent of him, pine, clean snow, and something wild beneath perfect control. He did not touch her. He did not crowd her. He simply stood near, and for the first time in her life, Alara felt what it meant for power to stand with someone instead of over them. "The rite has spoken," Kalen said. His voice was calm, but the calm carried through the hall like a command carved into stone. Aldrich's hands clenched inside his ceremonial sleeves. "The rite is incomplete. The Moonstone has been damaged. Until the council investigates, no claim can be recognized." Alara felt the old fear rise, quick and practiced. There it was again, the turning of truth into delay, delay into doubt, doubt into another locked door. Aldrich had done it to her mother. He had done it to her. And if the hall let him, He would do it again with prettier words. Miriam moved closer, but Alara lifted her hand slightly, asking her grandmother to wait. The motion surprised even her. She had spent years letting others speak because her own voice had been treated like something small. Now the moonstone hovered above her palm, and the entire northern court waited. Her throat felt tight, but she spoke anyway. "You told me my blood was unclean because no record proved otherwise," she said. "Now the stone has answered, and you say the answer must wait for your permission." Aldrich's face hardened. "Careful, girl." Kaelin's gaze sharpened, but Alara continued before the king could speak for her. "No, I have been careful my whole life. Careful not to stand too close, not to speak too loud, not to ask why my mother's name was treated like a warning. Careful not to embarrass people who were never careful with me." The words trembled, but they did not break. The moonstone brightened, as if each truth gave it strength. Around the hall, several older wolves lowered their heads. Alara saw it, and something inside her steadied. She was not trying to humiliate them. She was trying, for the first time, not to disappear. Aldrich took one step forward. "This is not dignity. This is defiance." Kaelin's voice cut through the space between them, quiet and cold. "Perhaps you have mistaken the two for too long." The elder stopped. Alara turned to the king, startled by the softness hidden beneath the steel of his words. He looked at her not as a servant, not as a scandal, not as a problem to solve, but as if her fear and courage were both worthy of being seen. The moonstone gave one final pulse. Its cracked surface opened wider, and from within the silver light rose a delicate shape, a crown of 3 moons woven around the mark of the white wolf. A gasp swept through the nobles. Miriam sank to her knees, not from weakness, but reverence. Kaelin looked at the symbol, and his face changed. "That is not merely a bloodline mark," he said. "That is the old sovereign seal." Alara's heart stumbled. The room tilted beneath her. She had come to this altar hoping to survive disgrace. Now every eye in the northern territories was fixed on her, as if the past had returned wearing her face. The old sovereign seal hung in the air like a forgotten star, bright enough to turn every jeweled collar and silver button in Moonstone Hall pale beneath its glow. Alara could not look away from it. 3 moons woven around the white wolf. A symbol she had traced as a child without knowing why. Hidden in the thread of her grandmother's shawl. Carved faintly into the lid of her mother's keepsake box. Appearing now above her palm, as if it had been waiting for the right breath to return. "No," Elder Aldrich whispered, and the words sounded less like denial than fear. King Kaelin heard it. So did Alara. The hall heard it too, and suddenly the question was no longer whether Alara belonged there. The question was why a man sworn to guard the truth looked terrified of it. Kaelin turned fully toward the council benches. "Open the royal archive chamber." Aldrich's head snapped up. "Your Majesty, that chamber has not been opened during a public rite in over a century." "Then tonight will be remembered," Kaelin said. No one moved at first. The council scribes stared at one another, pale and uncertain, until Kaelin lifted one hand. The royal guards at the east wall stepped aside from a pair of tall silver doors Alara had always thought were decorative. Their surface bore the same 3-moon seal, dulled by age, nearly invisible beneath frost and candle smoke. When the doors opened, a breath of cold air rolled into the hall, carrying the scent of parchment, cedar, and winter dust. Alara's fingers curled instinctively, and the moonstone floated lower, as if sheltering her hand. She wanted to ask what was happening. She wanted to ask why her heart felt like it was remembering something her mind had never been told. But her voice stayed trapped behind a lifetime of being punished for questions. Miriam came to her side at last, slow and careful, her blue shawl gathered in trembling hands. "I am sorry," she whispered. Alara turned to her. "You knew?" Pain crossed the old woman's face. "I knew pieces. Your mother made me promise to keep you alive before I kept you informed. I thought silence would protect you." Alara swallowed. The words hurt, but not like betrayal. They hurt like a locked room opening too late. From the archive chamber, 2 scribes carried out a long cedar box banded in silver. They set it before the altar, and one of them broke the wax seal with shaking hands. Inside lay a roll of white parchment, untouched by yellowing, bound with a ribbon the color of moonlight. Aldrich stepped back another inch. Kaelin noticed. "Read it," the king ordered. The younger scribe unrolled the parchment. His voice faltered at first, then steadied as the old words filled the hall. By witness of the Lunar Court and the Northern Crown, Leora Whitmore of the White Wolf line is recognized as lawful descendant of the first Moonstone keepers, bearer of sovereign lunar blood, and protected under royal covenant. The hall changed around Alara. Not loudly, not with cheers. It changed in the way people stood straighter when a lie finally lost its shelter. The scribe continued, his eyes widening. Any child born of her line shall not be judged by local council, pack elder, or lesser rite, for the Moonstone alone may answer such blood. Alara felt the floor beneath her feet, solid and cold, and yet she felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff with dawn rising below. Her mother had not been hidden because she was shameful. She had been hidden because she mattered. Aldrich's voice broke through the silence, polished no longer. That covenant was never ratified. Kalen walked to the cedar box and lifted a second document from beneath the first. He studied the seal at the bottom, then looked at Aldrich with a stillness more powerful than anger. It bears my mother's mark. A murmur trembled across the hall. Kalen turned back to Alara, and his expression softened just enough for her to breathe. Your mother was under crown protection. Alara's eyes burned. Then why was she left alone? No one answered. That silence told her enough. The Moonstone's cracked light gathered around her shoulders, not as a crown, not yet, but as warmth. Aldrich looked suddenly small beneath the ancient banners. You cannot let a stable girl overturn 20 years of order, he said. Alara lifted her chin. I am not overturning it, she said softly. I am surviving what it did. The words left Alara softly, but they crossed the hall with more force than any shout. I am surviving what it did. For a moment, no one seemed to know where to look. Not at Aldrich, whose authority had begun to crumble in front of the very court he had controlled for decades. Not at King Kalen, who stood beside the cedar box with the old covenant in his hand. Not at the nobles, many of whom had built their comfort on rules they had never questioned because those rules had never wounded them. They looked, at last, at Alara. Really looked. The stable girl in the gray dress. The quiet healer with pale hands and a trembling chin. The girl they had called a stain because it was easier than asking who had spilled the ink. The Moonstone hovered above her palm, cracked but radiant, its light moving around her like slow-falling snow. Then one of the older council women rose from her bench. Lady Rowena Vale had served the Northern Court since before Alara was born, a stern woman with silver hair and a voice that usually carried judgment, not tenderness. She looked at Aldrich, then at the open archive doors, then finally at Alara. Slowly, she bowed her head. The covenant is valid, she said. A sharp sound escaped Aldrich. Rowena. She did not look at him. The seal is valid. The witness marks are valid. And the Moonstone has confirmed what the archive records prove. Another council member stood, then another. Not all at once. Not bravely. But one by one, like candles being lit in a room that had been dark too long. Alara watched them with a strange ache in her chest. Part of her wanted to feel victory. Another part wanted to ask why truth needed so many witnesses before it was allowed to be kind. King Kalen folded the parchment with careful hands and returned it to the cedar box. Elder Aldrich, he said, you will surrender your council seal until a royal inquiry is complete. Aldrich's face tightened with disbelief. You would dishonor me over the word of an Omega? Kalen stepped closer, and the hall grew colder around him. I would dishonor no one. You have done that work yourself. The quiet was absolute. Aldrich looked toward the nobles, searching for loyalty, but the room he once commanded had shifted beyond his reach. Alara expected satisfaction to rise in her, sharp and bright. Instead, she felt tired. Not weak, not defeated, just tired in the way a person becomes tired after carrying a name no one else wanted to lift. Miriam touched her elbow gently. Your mother would have stood just like that, she whispered. Alara's breath caught. The Moonstone pulsed, and for an instant the silver light showed a woman's reflection in its broken surface. Leora Whitmore, young and pale, with silver blonde hair and eyes full of quiet courage. Alara did not hear her voice, but she felt the shape of it inside her heart. Do not shrink. Not anymore. Tears gathered in Alara's eyes, but she did not look away. Kalen saw the reflection too. His expression changed, not with surprise this time, but grief remembered. I met her once, he said quietly, so only Alara and Miriam could hear. Your mother. I was 12. She came to the capital under guard. My mother trusted her. Alara turned toward him. Then you knew? I knew a kind woman gave me a moon charm when I was frightened before my first royal rite, Kalen said. I did not know her name until tonight. From beneath his collar, he drew a small silver charm on a thin chain. 3 moons and a white wolf. Alara stared at it, the breath leaving her. The same mark. The same promise. The moonstone brightened between them, and her quiet wolf stepped forward inside her chest with sudden certainty. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Across the hall, every wolf felt the shift. Kalen went still. His winter-gray eyes met hers, and for the first time all night, the king looked less like a ruler carved from ice and more like a man standing at the edge of destiny. The cracked moonstone lowered itself between their hands, glowing brighter with each shared breath, as if the ancient rite had not finished choosing after all. The cracked moonstone hovered between Alara and Kalen, no longer cold, no longer distant, but alive with a soft silver glow that pulsed in time with their breathing. Alara stared at the small charm resting against the king's palm. 3 moons and a white wolf, worn smooth at the edges from years of being held, carried, remembered. Her mother had touched this. Her mother had given comfort to a frightened boy who would one day rule the north. The thought made the room feel both too large and too small. She told me courage was not the absence of fear, Kalen said, his voice low enough that the court had to lean into the silence to hear him. She said courage was choosing what was right while fear still had its hand on your shoulder. Alara's throat tightened. That sounded like Leora. Not because Alara remembered hearing those exact words, but because she remembered the way her mother had lived them, gentle even when tired, brave without ever needing to be loud. Miriam wiped at her eyes with the edge of her shawl. Around them, the nobles remained still, caught between the shame of what they had believed and the wonder of what they were witnessing. The moonstone drifted lower until its light touched both Alara's hand and Kalen's charm. The moment the two glows met, the air changed. Every wolf in Moonstone Hall felt it. Not a command, not a threat, a bond. Deep, ancient, and unmistakable. Alara's quiet wolf stepped fully from the shadows inside her, not roaring, not demanding, simply standing with luminous calm. Across from her, Kalen went motionless. His winter-gray eyes flashed silver, and for the first time, the mask of the Alpha King gave way to something raw and human. Wonder. Fated, Lady Rowena whispered. The word moved through the hall like a prayer that no one had planned to say aloud. Alara's heart beat fast, but she did not step back. She had spent her life being chosen last, named last, believed last. Now destiny stood before her, and still, what mattered most was not that a king saw her. It was that she could finally see herself without the shadow of their lies. Kalen seemed to understand that. He lowered his hand first, giving her space, giving her the dignity of breath. Alara Whitmore, he said, and her name sounded different in his voice, not hidden, not tolerated, but honored. The Moonstone has recognized your blood. The archive has restored your name, and my wolf has recognized what mine knew before I had words for it. A tremor passed through her fingers. What are you saying? I am saying the bond is real, Kalen answered. But a bond is not a cage. Not for me. Not ever. The words settled over her with a gentleness that nearly broke her. In every story Alara had heard, fate arrived like a chain, pulling people where power wanted them to go. But Kalen did not reach for her. He did not claim her before she could breathe. He stood in front of his court and gave her something Silverpine had never offered. A choice. Elder Aldrich, pale and stripped of certainty, made one last attempt to speak. Your Majesty, this is reckless. The realm cannot accept a Luna raised in a stable loft. Kalen turned his head, and the hall sharpened around him. The realm will learn what this court forgot, he said. Worth is not measured by the room that housed you, but by the soul that survived it. Alara felt those words land deep, touching every small hidden place where shame had lived too long. The moonstone rose above them, spinning slowly, its cracks widening with light instead of breaking apart. Then, one by one, the fragments began to separate, not falling, but floating outward like petals of silver glass. No one screamed. No one ran. The shattering was gentle, deliberate, holy. Each piece turned in the air and reflected Alara's face, not as the frightened girl who had walked up the altar steps, but as a woman crowned in moonlight, pale and steady, with the mark of the white wolf glowing at her wrist. Kalen lowered himself to one knee before her, and a sound of shock swept through the court. Elara froze. "Please," she whispered, overwhelmed. "Do not kneel because of a stone." He looked up at her, and his voice was quiet enough to belong only to her, yet clear enough to change the room. "I kneel because no one did when they should have." Kalen's words settled over Moonstone Hall like the first quiet snow of winter, soft enough to touch every heart, heavy enough to change the shape of the world beneath it. Elara stood before him, with silver fragments floating around her, each piece of the broken moonstone reflecting a different version of the girl she had been forced to hide. The child with herbs tucked in her pockets. The stable girl warming her hands over a lantern before dawn. The healer waiting outside doors that opened only when someone needed her gift. The daughter of a woman they had buried beneath rumor. The last living echo of a bloodline too old and too bright to be erased. For a long moment, she did not know what to do with a king on one knee before her. Part of her wanted to run, because being honored felt more frightening than being ignored. Ignoring had rules. Shame had patterns. She knew how to survive whispers, lowered eyes, and narrow beds beneath cold rafters. But this, the silence of hundreds waiting for her answer, the warmth of destiny unfolding at her wrist, the steady gaze of a man powerful enough to command the north and gentle enough to ask rather than take. This was a world she had never been taught to enter. Miriam stepped closer, tears shining on her weathered face. "Stand as your mother would have wanted," she whispered. Elara looked down at Kalen. "I do not know how to be what they are naming me." His expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened like ice under morning light. "Then do not become what they name you. Become who you are." The simplicity of it nearly undid her. Elara drew a breath, slow and unsteady, then extended her hand. Kalen accepted it, not gripping, not claiming, only letting her choose the contact. When he rose, the silver fragments rose with him, circling them both in a widening crown of light. Across the hall, Lady Rowena bowed first. One knee to the marble, one hand over her heart. Then another council member followed. Then a noblewoman. Then a guard. The movement spread through Moonstone Hall, not forced by command, but pulled by recognition. One by one, the court lowered itself before the girl they had once refused to see. Elara felt no triumph in their kneeling. What she felt was release, the quiet loosening of a burden she had carried so long she had mistaken it for part of her own body. Elder Aldrich remained standing until the very end, pale beneath the ancient banners. Kalen looked toward him, but Elara gently touched the king's sleeve before he spoke. "Let the inquiry judge what he did," she said. "I will not let my first act in the light be revenge." The hall heard her, and something changed again, deeper than awe. Respect. Aldrich lowered his eyes at last, not forgiven, not freed from consequence, but no longer powerful enough to define her. Above the altar, the fragments of the moonstone gathered into a new shape, not the old shield of judgment, but a ring of silver light surrounding the white wolf seal. Its glow spilled through the high windows and out over Silverpine Citadel, across the snow-covered roofs, the frozen courtyards, the stables where Elara had once slept unnoticed, and the northern forest beyond. Somewhere in that light, her quiet wolf lifted its head and howled without sound, not in anger, but in arrival. Kalen stood beside her, close but not controlling, his black cloak brushing the marble at his feet. "The North will want answers," he said. Elara looked at the hall, at Miriam, at the opened archive, at the fragments of truth finally given shape. Her fear was still there, a small cold hand on her shoulder, but it no longer ruled her. "Then we will give them the truth," she said. Kalen's mouth curved, barely, but enough to make the winter in his face feel less endless. The silver light touched them both, and the bond between them settled not like a chain, but like a vow waiting to be chosen day by day. Elara had walked into Moonstone Hall expecting to be erased. She left it with her name restored, her mother honored, and a kingdom watching as the Alpha King opened the great doors himself. Outside, dawn broke over the northern territories, pale gold over white snow. And for the first time in her life, Elara did not step toward the edge of the light. She stepped into it.